Friday the 13th, Part 3 takes place right after Friday the 13th, Part 2. And, wait a minute, it takes place right after. Wait a minute. So, it's not Friday the 13th anymore, it's Saturday the 14th. What the heck, guys? Friday the 13th Part 3 is the first and only entry in the Friday the 13th franchise to be in 3D. And the 3D, as it was back in the 80s, a lot of the 3D in this movie is a little bit obnoxious and gimmicky. But, I mean, it's fine. I like gimmicky 3D as long as I can watch it. I get headaches.
I have warned thee!
I mean, the 3D in this movie is better than some other movies that come out today. Looking at you, Spider-Man Homecoming, where there is literally no 3D in the movie. I digress. Once again, the formula is very much kind of the same in this movie. That is the big problem with the first three Friday the 13th movies. The feeling is very much the same. Basically, it starts off with this random kind of killing spree where we sort of know what's going on. Then we're introduced to the teenagers of the movie and the final girl and all that. We're introduced to the normal horror archetypes of the movie. And then Jason goes on his killing spree again and starts randomly killing people left and right. Honestly, there's not really a lot to say about this movie, other than the fact that the 3D is a little bit obnoxious. There is one really memorable scene in this whole movie. This is the movie where Jason gets his iconic hockey mask.
Hey, I dropped your wallet. What are you doing? Hey, now cut that out right now. That's not funny.
The movie starts off with a bunch of store owners getting killed by Jason Voorhees. And then it moves on to the teenagers of the movie. For once though, the story doesn't take place at a campground, but it takes place at more of a country cottage kind of area. Which is a little bit refreshing, but it's still in the woods, yada yada, you know, typical Jason. The teenagers start to get settled when a biker gang winds up getting involved in the story. They wind up terrorizing the kids just because they can, because evil bikers, I guess. There's a scene where the teens wind up fighting the gangs back at a country store. Somehow the bikers wind up finding out where the teens are staying. They go there, they empty the van out of gas, they try to burn the barn down, I guess, but Jason gets them all, one by one, in glorious 3D. That is one thing that is still entertaining about the franchise, if you want to say people getting murdered is entertaining. The murders are still a little bit over the top in some ways, and it just gets even more ridiculous as the franchise goes on, even as this movie goes on, and you'll see why. So the main character of this movie, or the final girl of this movie, because all the movies have a final girl, Chris and her boyfriend go off to go talk about some backstory about why she stopped going to that particular house for a long time, or why she stopped like dating him for a little bit or whatever. But apparently what happened was she had a very traumatic experience in the woods where she actually met Jason Voorhees.
He was so grotesque. He was almost inhuman. He had a knife.
However, this is the same Jason that we've just seen. He doesn't have a hockey mask. He doesn't have a potato sack over his head. He looks exactly the same as the Jason in this movie and not as the previous Jason. And on top of that, this Jason already should really not be that old, or at least like really big and buff and tough and everything. But for some odd reason, this story that she's telling happens quite a few years before the events of Friday the 13th Part 2. And somehow he's still a huge, big, bulking guy. I mean, I don't know, maybe he just, when he came out of the lake, he just stayed a really big, buff guy? I don't really know. That is one problem with the series as a whole. The consistency of the franchise is just awful. The only thing that they actually get right is the freaking hockey mask and the fact that there's a niche in it. That's really the only consistency that stays throughout the entire franchise. So anyway, after Chris tells this story, people start getting killed one by one, either because they're having sex, or because they're doing drugs, or some other stuff. Chris and her boyfriend wind up returning to the cabin, where they notice everything's wrong, just like in number 2 and in number 1. The boyfriend goes missing because Jason winds up grabbing him and popping his eye out. Oh my gosh. That was gloriously cheesy. It was so beautiful. It's just so beautiful. Chris is still looking around for people when eventually Jason winds up throwing the boyfriend inside of the house through the window. Apparently that's Jason's favorite way of meeting people, breaking through windows like the Kool-Aid guy.
Oh yeah, here comes Kool-Aid, here comes Kool-Aid, I'm gonna save the day.
So in classic slasher fashion, Jason and the final girl get into a fight. She hangs him, and that didn't work apparently. He takes off his mask and shows her that he's the guy who tormented her a few years back. And then finally, she freaking puts an axe in his head, which apparently does the job. Right before he outstretches his arms and basically is just like, no, I'm still going to get you, I'm still going to get you. And then he falls over and dies. Supposedly. Very similar to the first one, which I thought was really dumb. She gets on a canoe, goes out to the lake, falls asleep in the boat, and then wakes up to see that, everything is still pretty much the same, everyone's dead, all that fun jazz. She's still in the boat, by the way. Jason, I guess, is alive. He comes barging out of the house.
Oh yeah!
And is about to try and kill her when all of a sudden he just randomly disappears. And then this part happens. Jason's mother all of a sudden does the jump scaring, and her head is still on. I don't get it. Honestly, this is probably one of the most confusing scenes out of the entire franchise, and it's just that no one gets it. No one gets why the heck Mrs. Voorhees all of a sudden jumps out of the lake, as, with a decayed face and everything, and drags her out of the boat. Did they just want to have a similar ending to the first movie? I don't know. No one knows! As it turns out, it was just a hallucination or something, and Jason is still dead inside of the barn with the axe in his head. The police are there dealing with the whole situation. They take Chris away, who's laughing maniacally because she had too much happy gas. And that's the end of Friday the 13th Part 3. With people basically thinking, oh, this is finally the end! This is the last Friday the 13th movie! No, we still got 9 more to go! Friday the 13th Part 3 is honestly my least favorite out of the whole franchise. The characters are nowhere near interesting. The kills, although are fun and over the top, or at least starting to get fun and over the top, are just meh, I guess. The 3D aspect is really bad in the movie. And actually the worst part about it is, when you're watching this movie in 2D, basically the 3D scenes are very obnoxious, which is basically all 80s horror movies that were coming out around this time. This is my least favorite of the franchise. I still recommend watching it because this is a very important entry in the franchise because of Part 4, which will be coming out tomorrow. This has been the Valley of Death, where everything is spooky, but we keep things light. I'll see you guys later.